to Geared for Growth. I'm your host, Mike Mortlock from MCG Quantity Surveyors, and today I've got a very special interview with a gentleman who started the podcast by saying, I might have 7 properties by the time I'm 27, but I've made a lot of mistakes. And didn't he over-deliver on the mistakes that he's made? I'm talking today to Adrian Trimboli, who's been very humble and very giving on the lessons that he's learned in property, and it could be a really good cautionary tale for anyone that's wanting to grow a big property. We talk about the mistakes that he's made in the past, how his process and his planning differs from when he started his investing journey in property, admittedly not doing any research at all or knowing too much about property compared to the sophisticated investor he is today. It's an awesome interview with Adrian, who's really open and honest with his journey, and he's got some great tips for you. I'm sure you'll enjoy. Here's Adrian. Adrian Trimboli, welcome to Geared for Growth.
Thank you very much, Mike. Very, very happy to be here.
It's a pleasure to get you on, and I know that there's a lot of people that are going to be very interested in your story, Adrian, because you are a chappie who has achieved 7 properties by the age of 27. Now, if you look at the statistics, we're still talking, 73% of investors only own 1 property, and, you're in very, very rarefied air once you get to 5 or more. And of course, once you're getting around that level, that's where you're running into serviceability problems, and it becomes a game of finance. So I'm guessing that, you have an Italian name, but you're not from an old money Italian family, and you've just sort of cruised your way into this.
No, you're right. A lot of it does go down to my beautiful Italian mother, who came up with the grand idea of telling my brother and I at 18 years old to go and buy an apartment right around the corner from where we lived. So that was my introduction to property. It was a horrible property. I've made a lot of mistakes as well. But I've been very lucky to been running this business and buying a lot of properties through this business over the last 3 years. So I've made a lot of mistakes, mate. It sounds sexy, but I've made a lot of mistakes. Well,
I appreciate you being so open and humble with that, because I think that's what people that listen to this show identify with the most, right? It's, we get another guest on, he goes, 7 properties by 27. Oh, here we go again. Like someone that's just absolutely crushed it. Like people do actually want to know that the people that can achieve success in property are human beings and they make mistakes. So did you have any interest in property when your mum said you need to go and buy a property, or was that you just being a good boy and doing what you were told?
Well, we were both heading off to schoolies, my brother and I, and my mum came up with me and my brother worked very hard when we were 15 years old and doing what we had to do, working at McDonald's and whatnot. We saved up, with help, right? We saved up some money and we bought an apartment in Brunswick, which is around the corner from where I live. And I had no idea about property. No idea. I didn't want to do it. We were going to schoolies. The last thing on our mind was property. So we bought that property. That was our first introduction to property. And we thought it was great and we thought it was grand until, 10 years later, it's still worth the same amount. But that was my first introduction. And no, I did not have any interest in property. Not until a few properties after. Yeah.
And once when you explain the property round the corner from where you live, that's kind of a little bit of a red flag, and something that we've been publishing data on, the distance from where people live and where they invest, because there's that old adage that, people are lazy and they'll buy around the corner because that's what they know. But, the reality is a little bit different. But it is kind of a red flag when you say, you bought around the corner and you bought an apartment. Now, that isn't necessarily recipes for failure, but what was it about that property that, knowing what you know now, you would have done differently?
If I did the complete opposite, it would have been good. If I did the complete opposite. So if I had done any bit of research, it would have been great. If it bought anything else but an apartment, I don't like townhouses either. So realistically, a house, something with a land component. But it was on a main road, cladding issues, you name it. Cheap rent, not even great yields. Just, I would have, if I could have done the exact opposite, I'd been, that's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars that I've lost there, potentially millions of dollars just on that one deal.
Yeah, I guess with the opportunity cost there, right? So it begs the question, with the first property being unsuccessful, and I think this is the reason why people don't necessarily get to that second and third properties. They get the first one wrong. In your own words, you've got the first one wrong, but how was it that you were able to get the second one when that one was a bit of a dud investment?
Well, lucky for me, the property, I didn't spend a hell of a lot of money. I think I spent $215,000 on that property, right? So it was cheap. The second property, again, great idea. Let's buy another property on the same block with my brother and my mum. So we bought the same property on the same block. Again, thinking we were doing the right thing, we actually paid that property down. So no debt on that property. And then it wasn't until, so essentially I had $200,000 worth of debt. I was now into a proper job, had some good income, obviously was able to do more things. And wasn't until the third property, which again, I still didn't really have much of an idea about property. That's when it all kind of changed. And that's when I started going down this route of doing proper research and then eventually leading me to do what I'm doing today. But I think, going back to your question, the reason I was able to continue borrowing is because, one, I didn't know I made the mistake, so I didn't get fearful like a lot of people do. And two, the level of debt that I actually had was very, very low. Luckily.
Yeah, which I suppose just came down to a price point and, the lending ecosystem such as it was back then. So you mentioned it took you actually a couple of property purchases before you actually became interested in, getting off your backside and doing some research. Was that property number 3 where you're like, okay, I've got a couple here, paid it down, maybe getting a bit of rent coming in, but imagine if I put a bit more effort and heart and soul into this, what I could achieve?
No, property 3 was a disaster. Property 3 was a disaster as well. Not a disaster as in the asset selection, a disaster as in the research and what I did. And one of the ones, again, it was a property 10 kilometers away from where I live now.
Yep.
Bought the property at auction. Finance was not ticked off, right? So finance wasn't cleared. And ended up buying the property, the third one, 3 days away from settlement. The broker took off and ran off. So I was stuck with losing my $60,000 deposit. Otherwise, I had to come up with, so I had to push back settlement. I had to come up with $320,000 in order to secure the property because I couldn't get finance and so and so. So it was the most stressful time of my life. I thought I was going to lose my deposit. I had to go to my uncle, my mum, very Italian family, like you said, and borrow $320,000 to secure that. And after that, same thing happened to Frank at the same time, which is obviously my business partner. That is when we then thought, holy shit, he was on his third property as well. Then I was on my third property. We're meant to know what we're doing. Had no idea. And that's when we went down the route. That was about 6 years ago.
Yep. So that's when you kind of thought, well, we're all in on this property thing, right? Like we've made three mistakes, and chances are we've got to get the fourth one right. But is that when you started, your interest in property? Because of course, the viewers that maybe haven't come across you before, listeners that haven't come across you before, you co-own with Frank that you mentioned before, a buyer's agency business. So at some point in time, you became passionate about property and educated about property, right? So, when you sort of said at the beginning, I've made some mistakes, you certainly haven't under-delivered on that statement so far. I mean, talk us through the first success. At least put us out of our misery. Was that number 4?
That was number 4. So luckily... From that moment, as I said, Frank Frank probably got a bit more of an interesting story, right? I've just made some stupid mistakes. Frank actually went to a buyer's agent for his second and third property, and he lost a shitload of money. And I hope I'm allowed to say that on here. I hope I don't get into it. Sorry. He lost money. So he essentially under market, off the plan, all that stuff, right? Happened literally at the exact same time. So then we came together, we said, okay, well, we've stuffed up. we can either be scared from property altogether, or we can actually dive in and actually properly start learning about property. That's when the whole shift. So I took 2 years off essentially buying any property, and we just went to everything. Seminars, we read books. You can probably see behind there. There's just books and books and books. And we just learned everything that has to do about property. Property number 4 was an awesome property. That was an interstate property, an 8.5% yield, a 26% growth in the first year. And that's when everything started to click. And then from there, I've obviously gone and purchased, a fair few properties after that.
Yeah, of course. So assuming that one was the first one, you would have had a lot less headaches, but perhaps there's a lot of education that you got out of that. So it's easy to go, oh, I lost this money, or with opportunity costs, we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. But I'm assuming that you as an investor and your clients are beneficiaries of this, right? So maybe it's a little bit too glass half full for you, but how do you view it?
No, you're very right. And I actually say this to a lot of the people that I speak to now. Every single decision we make in this business now that we run today, we're very fortunate to help people buy property. It's based off the fact that both Frank and I went through hardship and went through genuinely sleepless nights. Property is not really a difficult game. No one should go through sleepless nights or be fearful they're going to lose this money or lose that if you know what you're doing. So every decision, everything that we do, like from the point of, taking kickbacks from other people and putting money in our pocket and, doing sneaky, we just, no, it's happened to us. We would never allow it to happen to anyone else that we ever deal with. So, unfortunately, fortunately for a lot of our clients, we've done the learning. But yeah, unfortunately for us, we had to go through that pain.
And where do you see most investors getting it wrong these days? I mean, we reference the percentage of people that only own one property. Most people aren't getting to the second, and there's very few people that are getting to 5, 6, and 7 like yourself. What do you think is the reason why people aren't expanding their portfolios?
I think there's a few reasons. I think I very well could have been in that percentage, right? If I bought my apartment, waited 5 years, worked out that it hadn't grown, and then gone, oh, well, that was crap, and then just kind of not really looked into it. I think what you just said, buying next to where they live because they think that they know the cafe or they know what's next to them. Yeah, that has nothing to do with property prices growing or rental yields. That has nothing to do with it. And then just life getting in the way, right? You need to dedicate. In order to get a professional result in real estate, which is a huge asset, huge amount of money you're throwing down, I think you need to treat it like a professional. And if you don't, you're probably going to get bitten in the ass sometime. I mean, a lot of the times we get lucky, right? I got lucky with my third property. Yep. I got really unlucky with my first 2. So, yeah, there's a few reasons.
And so when you started looking at, 5, 6, and 7, was it a matter of, even some of these poor purchases, they were carried by the equity gains of the better properties? So you mentioned 26% in the first 12 months. Was that at the point where equity was kind of working for you and you were able to redraw, or are you still having to stump up cash for deposits?
No, so I actually haven't used a deposit since my second property, as in my own cash. It's always been equity. Yep. It's always been equity. In saying that, it's always been it has always been the growth and looking to, not necessarily holding on to these bad assets. Also, I'm not someone that is a proud person that has to hold on to some of these properties. So I will be selling, those properties this year, because I'm not having 10 properties or saying I've got 50 properties. It doesn't mean much to me. I just want stress-free portfolio and high-performing properties.
That you've struck on an interesting point, because even in sort of brainstorming for us having a chat, we were talking about, 7 properties by 27, a team of 7 in your business, which is unfortunately wasn't going to work because there's 9 of you. There's this kind of temptation to pin these sorts of things, 10 properties in 10 years, or, there's got to be this catchphrase or this tagline or some arbitrary way of saying, well, this is successful because I've done this in this time period. But often I sort of think that once you get past those, maybe those ego metrics, you can start to be a little bit more rational and go, well, I actually don't really care about the number. I just have perhaps a goal of cash flow that I want to live on in retirement. Do you think that's like, do people come to you and say like, I want to have this in this time frame, and you actually have to have those discussions? Well, let's actually think what you want your life to look like, and park that stuff for a minute. The Geared for Growth Property Investing podcast is presented by our business, MCG Quantity Surveyors. If you're an investor or a property professional looking to get the best tax depreciation deductions for yourself or your clients, please get in touch with us at mcgqs.com.au. It's our mission to help as many property investors as we can to maximise their claims and maximise their property education as well.
Yeah, no, you're right. The amount of properties does not matter at all. It's great for the ego. It's like what we were talking about before. Having 50 staff or 60 staff is probably great for the ego. It's necessarily not great for the business, right? If the profit's not there, and if the lifestyle's not there, it's the same with property. If I've got 5 or 4 properties paid off and they're generating me $150,000 of cash flow in my pocket every year, I'd much rather that than 12 properties and they're all at 80 or 90% LVR and they're putting 20 grand in my pocket. I think it's good for the ego, really good for the ego, right? That sounds awesome at a barbecue or something like that, but it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't. Yeah. That's my belief.
Yeah, and I think in Australia, you're more likely to have people hate you than admire you. I think there's a bit of tall poppy syndrome out there, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So when you're doing, discovery calls or catch-ups with clients, and people are saying, I've seen you on that Geared for Growth podcast or what have you. Hopefully that'll happen down the track.
Great podcast in the world.
Yeah. Do they sort of say, look, I kind of want what you're having, or do they say, look, I've read this book, 135 properties in 3 minutes, and that's what I want to do? Like, what are people coming to you asking for?
Generally, it is actually a passive income goal, right?
Right.
The very first thing that we do in our business is we put together what's called a 10-year plan, or a 15 or 20-year plan, whatever it is. It has nothing to do with the amount. It has more to do with what your lifestyle wants to be, right? Yep. So prior to having that discovery call or session, the people that we speak to, they need to watch a certain amount of videos. That's the first video that they have to watch, us walking through the 10-year plan. Yep. So when they jump on that call, it's guided towards, where do you actually want to be? What do you want to do? Holidays do you want to take? Do you want to, take your kids or whatever it is, right? What does actually 6 properties mean, or what does 100K in passive income actually mean? But again, there's always going to be people that say, no, it needs to be 10, it needs to be this, and it needs to be in that certain order, and that's fine. But I think it's the dollars and the cents behind those 10 figures or 9 figures or whatever the goal is for the amount of properties. I think that's the most important. It is, at least for myself, right? I don't care about the amount of properties.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think that's really what's kind of missing with property investing industry in general, is that we're always sort of starting with the property and the hotspots. Where are the places I should buy? And I heard that Port Hedland's going to come back, or they're getting 9% yield in Mandurah, or whatever it is, right? There's always something, but there's not a lot of slow down and sit down and think about what you want your life to look like, and then reverse engineer your properties to sort of achieve that. You're like, oh, that makes sense, but gosh, it's not as fun as like, let's just quick buy in this place because it's going to go up 20%, right?
I've learned, probably not last year, it kind of cemented to me, but chasing towards the next hot thing because it sounds good, it just doesn't work. I don't think it works with anything. It doesn't work with business, doesn't work with fitness, right? Just saying, oh, I'll try HIIT classes now. It doesn't work with property, right? Having a plan, actually going to somewhere and knowing where you have to go, knowing the assets that you need to attain to actually achieve that should stop you from getting, the next, whatever the saying is, going to the next hot hot thing that pops up in front of you. I was like that, 2-3 years ago. So I'm not saying that I'm immune to that, but I think that is a huge problem. I think that goes back to the plan though, not having a plan in place.
And so what do you sort of recommend to people when it comes to the planning? I mean, we talked about having a passive income goal, or, you did say it depends what you want to do, whether you want to take your kids on a trip around the world or send them to private schools or something like that. But do you find that it's difficult for people to really sort of go internal and decide, well, yeah, what does happiness and life and success look like to me?
Yeah, I mean, take property out of it, right? Sorry, probably not expecting this. I've got this that I read every single day. Oh, that's the thing. Now, this might sound a bit wishy-washy and whatnot, but that's what I want my ideal life to be in my relationship with my partner, in my business, with my team, and my health. Now, I read that every single day, so I'm really, really clear on where I want to go. Now, whether it's property, whether it's stocks, whether it's a business, I would always start at the end.
Yep.
Now, I've learned that by running this business. I didn't do this right at the start of running my business. I was just thought, you want to start a buyer's agency? We love it. Don't want the pain. But whatever you're trying to do, I would always start at the end, because how the hell are you meant to, you do triathlons. How are you meant to know when you're going to achieve it, or what you need to achieve, what fitness level you need to be at if you haven't got a plan to get there? So
you're absolutely right. You can probably tell by looking at me, though, I'm semi-retired, perhaps permanently retired from triathlon. But you're right, and I think there's some really great parallels between training or for an event or even just losing weight, right? You've got to have this ideal notion of, here's what I want to do. I want to cross the finish line at a certain time, or I'm X amount of kilos and I want to get to here. You can't just kind of go, oh, well, I'll throw a couple of things together and I know I'm going to get there. You've actually got to plan for and set little incremental milestones, and you've got to think about it long term, but also day to day. And that, today, if I don't recover, I can't do my next session, or today's session is I've got to do this, and this is what I need to hit to know that I'm getting the adaptation right. And I think that's where you were kind of talking about property, getting disciplined about it and treating it like a business is where that success comes from. Is that sort of what you're getting at there?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, treating it like a business, you need to have a proper tracker, right? So you can definitely search online. We've got a proper 10-year plan tracker, and it's just like your accountability partner. You're following where the equity is. You're following that. But yes, definitely, you need to do something from the norm. If the norm is 78% or whatever the number you quoted before, have less than 2 properties, almost do the complete opposite of what the 78% are doing, right? And then if you go 3, you need to be doing something different. You can't just be doing what everyone else is doing, because you will not, statistically, you're not going to succeed, which is sad.
Yeah, but that's a really good point, right? Like in a way, if you're wanting success in property, those are sort of the people that are the competition in a way, that they've made mistakes, and that's why they're where they are. Now, I want to sort of preface that to say, look, if your goal is to own one property and you achieve that, great. No one's saying that's not successful, but I think that most property investors get involved in property because they want it to really, really change their financial future. And there's a very strong argument to say that one property isn't enough. If it's $10 million commercial property, you're probably off to the races, right? But your average person isn't kind of buying that. So to finish off, I wouldn't mind sort of getting perhaps some tips from you, or some analysis on what Adrian's mindset was at the beginning of the property compared to what you look for in property now. How do you get sort of clear on the type of property that is going to fit within your portfolio that's getting you closer to your goals, and how is that different to what your process was before?
Yeah. And yeah, so just to go back one, I'm not saying that owning one property as well is to own one property and buy one property is an awesome achievement. So definitely want to make that clear, because I think being able to save, being able to, get equity, being able to take the plunge and do something like that, I think is really awesome. So yeah, owning 1 or 10 doesn't make you any different, I think. Just changes your lifestyle. Exactly what you said. Regards to what I did back when I was started, well, I didn't do anything, right? I listened to my mother, who, thank God, she made me do it, but she doesn't own any property, right? She owns her own home, which is great. I've bought her, a couple of properties now through this business. So listening to someone who is not where you want to be is probably a no-go. That's something I definitely change now. Not having a finance plan at all. So not knowing, if I buy this property, how long is it going to take me to get into the next one? I now have a 20-year plan. So I know exactly what properties I need to buy over the next now 8 years in order for me to reach my end goal. That's the comparison. And then doing proper analysis. So, looking at how many, this is one, right? Looking at how many renters are in a particular street compared to, this is next door to me, I'll buy that property. We've got a 72-step process that we run by. Now, I'm very lucky. I get literally go to Frank and go to our buyer's agent and say, hey, I'm ready to buy a property. Can you do it? They do all the analysis. That's awesome. But I understand that they've literally got a 72-step tick sheet that they need to run by and tick off to identify that this is going to be a high-performing asset, as opposed to when I was 18 and even on my third purchase, it's good, I can afford it. Let's go for it. That's probably, those are there's a lot of other things, but those are kind of the three big ones, I think.
That's awesome. And I'm guessing an apartment around the corner from where you live doesn't make it through that 72-point due diligence checklist.
No, for a very long time. It may one day, maybe in 50 years, but not at the moment.
Well, Adrian, I must say I'm very grateful for your honesty in basically saying I was terrible at property investing and here's what I learned. I think people really benefit from that. I think people really enjoy someone saying, look, I might have something that's defined as successful in inverted commas now, but it wasn't given to me and I made mistakes, and here's what you can learn that I did wrong and save yourself from that. So I really appreciate that very much, and thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you, Mike. Always a pleasure. Really appreciate it.
Cheers.